Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old-timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. So last week I did a show the day before Christmas, wondering if anybody was going to listen to it. And today I'm doing one the day before New Year's. Kind of the same thing, but the way I figure it is y'all are off work, you're traveling, you're maybe spending time with family. You know, you probably got a little time you want to listen to a podcast. And I think consistency is really the key to many things in life. For instance, I'll give you a for instance. Last week, actually on Friday, I finished doing edits and revisions, well, almost, on my 13th book. After proofreading, I know there are going to be a couple more corrections I have to make in spelling. I mean, I am dyslexic. I make a lot of mistakes that I can't see myself. So a very dear friend of mine is doing a little proofreading on the book, and then I'll give it a quick update, and it'll be ready to publish. Well, she asked she said she didn't know how I write so many books so fast. And I said, well, that's actually sort of an illusion. It's not that I'm sitting here writing one book after another very fast. It's that I write 2 to 3 books at a time. I literally will budget my time in a day to where I'm working an hour on this book, an hour on that book, and an hour on another book. And because of that, because they're not all the same length, after an initial, lag time of like 6 to 9 months, I started releasing a book every couple of months. One book may be 150 pages and another one may be 450 pages with several in between. So it looks like I'm writing a book every, 2-3 months. I'm not writing a book every 2-3 months. I'm writing multiple books on sort of a rotating release schedule. Right now I'm working on 3 books, actually, So that's the way it works. What I mean as far as consistency, people tend to get very overwhelmed with many things in life. The thing is, do a little at a time each day on each project. You'll be amazed. I really learned that. It was an old quote from Henry Miller. I mean, I'm a very politically conservative, Orthodox Catholic, not exactly the kind of guy you'd think I'd be quoting, although actually he was a brilliant writer, even if his subjects were, a little immoral. He was a very talented writer. Very influential upon my writing in my teens. Okay, that again, if you know me as just like, really kind of traditional laid-back Southern Catholic guy, you may be surprised, but I devoured his books in my teens. And yes, they were quite a bad influence in some ways, but a good influence in learning the way he wrote. He was a big influence on my writing. Jack Kerouac was far larger, greater influence on my writing. Kerouac really helped shape my writing. Herman Hesse would be another one. J.D. Salinger, again, controversial figures that really influenced the way I write. William Faulkner was, huge. absolutely huge. But I'm not recommending their books. I'm just saying, although, you know, I would definitely, without a doubt, I mean, if you want to understand the South, read Kerouac. Yeah. If you want to understand American Catholic of French heritage, and the way he was relating to the world in the 40s and 50s, and a brilliant guy, Jack Kerouac. It was really great. Kerouac actually, even though he's known as like the father of the beat movement and the hippies and all that came later that looked up to the beatniks, he was actually a pretty conservative Catholic. He really did not like where the movement went, the way it went toward communism and, the hippie culture. I mean, he was friends with Allen Ginsberg, but he really did not like Ginsberg's influence on the culture. He probably would have been a Trump supporter if he had lived, believe it or not. I know he would have supported Reagan. So, I mean, even though, some of the works are questionable, the writing style was brilliant. Thomas Wolfe was somewhat of an influence when it came to writing style. I don't even like Thomas Wolfe, which is like heresy if you come from North Carolina. He was ashamed of his southern roots, but he was a good writer, so that was an influence. But what my point is on all that is Miller said write 2 pages a day every day. No matter what happens in your day, write 2 pages a day every day. When you get to the end of the second page, he would leave the sentence unfinished. And what he would do, if it didn't end at the end of the page, the next day he'd pick it up and he'd see where he left off, and he'd be inspired to write, the next sentence, right? 2 pages a day every day. He said at the end of the year, read through it, throw out all the garbage, and you're left with probably about a 700-page book. Well, I don't want to write a 700-page book, especially because the way Amazon works, the longer my books are, the less money I make on them. And I don't make much. I mean, honestly, Amazon, I mean, you see my book and it's selling for like, $20 or so. Amazon's going to take 17 of that. I mean, and if I've got a book over 250 pages, if I can keep it down toward like 150 pages, I might make $5. So, I mean, you got to understand, I'm not making a fortune off these books. And if you ever wonder, like, that's kind of a pricey book, well, it's because Amazon takes most of the money. I can't help that. Anyway, that's the key to just about anything in life. Work. You want to have a nice garden? Put an hour and a half a day into it. An hour a day. Once it's established, 30 minutes a day. Every day, and you're going to have a real nice garden that's very productive. You want to build something fantastic? Put an hour a day into it. Schedule that time. Over time, it's going to turn, I mean, just anything in life. That's how I learned Latin. If you want to learn a foreign language, just put in even 15 or 30 minutes a day, every single day. That's true in martial arts, which, I studied for many years. That's true in archery and shooting skills. That's true in anything you want to do. As I say, my habit has been on a yearly basis, read 5 pages a day of the Bible. You read the whole Bible in a year, even taking weekends off. You can do anything if you take it incrementally. So, Henry Miller said write 2 pages a day. I write 2 pages a day, really more like 3, and but on 3 different books, or 2. Sometimes I'm working on 2 at a time. But it keeps my mind fresh. It keeps me interested, and it looks like I'm writing a lot of books really quickly when I'm actually not. So, that's really my advice. This New Year's Eve, as I'm doing this show. People are going into the new year and they're making their New Year's resolutions. Well, my advice for you, if you want to have a New Year's resolution that actually works and sticks with it, is just budget your time so that you're spending a set period of time each day on this project, and you don't miss it. Barring an absolute disaster, you don't miss it. Even if you're sick, you force yourself to do it, even if it's not your best work. It's a discipline. If you want to learn, if you want to get in shape, say how many minutes a day am I willing to exercise? Is it 15 minutes? You know what? 15 minutes a day over 365 days is going to really add up. Is it 30 minutes? I wouldn't go over an hour. You're not going to keep up with that. You're going to get tired. You're going to drop the ball. Anything you want to learn to do, any reform you want to do in your life, any habit you want to cultivate, decide what it is and decide at, you know, 2 p.m. every day I'm going to take 10 minutes doing this and stick with it and you'll accomplish that goal. I'm as dead serious as I can be on that. That's how I do what I do. And people will say, I'm amazed you do this and this and this and that. And I'm like, look, it's actually pretty easy. If I was, I'm self-employed. If I was going in working for an employer, I'd be working an 8-hour day. Well, I just take my day and I say, I'm going to spend 2 hours a day doing this. I'm going to spend 1 hour a day doing this. I'm going to spend 1 hour a day doing this. And I have my schedule and I stick to it. And, obviously I usually work more like a 12-hour day because I'm self-employed and I enjoy what I do. Anything you want to do, make that schedule and stick with it. And you're going to do it. You can accomplish anything. I mean, you can literally be a, high school dropout. And if you want to learn to be a nuclear physicist, if you invest that time every single day in learning the subject, over a period of time, you're going to be as expert on the matter as someone who has multiple PhDs. That's reality. I mean, any skill you want, from auto mechanics to carving wood to, I don't care what it is. You devote that time and you budget it and you're going to do it. That's one of the great things about human potential. Just determination, discipline, and you can do anything. So now let's get into today's recipe. It is New Year's Eve, and I am a Southerner. Yes, you may have just figured that out, but yes, I am from the South. My family has been in the South since the late 1600s, minimum, and we have a traditional Southern New Year's Eve meal that you may have heard of. We have greens, we have black-eyed peas, and we usually have some pork. Now, the greens and the black-eyed peas are representative of the money you hope to make in the next year. It's supposed to bring you wealth if you eat your greens and your black-eyed peas. Now, it can be any other kind of cowpea, field peas, but black-eyed peas really are the most traditional. And when it comes to greens, it can be collard greens, turnip greens, mustard greens. If you want to have cabbage, that's fine. And if you don't like pork, go for beef. But, you got to have some good protein with this meal. So today, getting ready for the New Year's Eve feast. It's going to be a New Year's Day feast, which is actually even more important. It's going to be collard greens. It's going to be Hoppin John. I'll get to that in a second. And some good pork chops. So I have told you many times about my preferred way to have greens. This way my grandmother made them. This way my great-grandmother made them. This way my mother made them. This way I make them. People really tend to complicate and mess up their greens, all right? Now, when it comes to mustard greens, I have never found a mustard green I didn't like. I guess if I had to have a preference, it's going to be the curly-leaved. I think they call them the Florida mustard green. They're really good. Any mustard greens are good. Wild mustard's good. It's peppery. It's just delicious. Turnips, I prefer the purple-topped turnip. To me, that turnip has a better taste than white turnips. White turnips are what you usually see at a store. White turnips are ubiquitous in Asian cooking. The purple top, it's an heirloom turnip. It's purple on top and white on the bottom. So it's like how sometimes radishes can be red on top and white on the bottom. This is a purple top turnip. To me, it has the better flavor. Chop those turnip greens, and this is true of all greens. This is the way we cook them. Chop them and wash them, or wash them and chop them. It really doesn't matter which sequence, which order the sequence is in. Take a pan, or a pot, I guess I should say. Put some fat back in there, or some bacon grease. Let that start to render out. Yes, you can use olive oil if you want, but we do want some pork in our greens. I mean, come on. Life is short. Have some pork in your greens. Cook that pork, render out the fat. Take your still wet greens, put them in there, and let them cook down in the fat. A little salt over the top. Leave the lid off. That's the most important thing. If you put a lid on any cruciferous greens, as they cook, they will release sulfur gases. The sulfur gases will combine with the the water. It will become sulfuric acid. It will stink real bad, and it will turn your greens a nasty, gray, dingy, like army green, kind of mushy, bitter, not good. And see, that's why most people don't like greens, is because that's the way they've been served to them. Leave the lid off. Yeah, it's going to stink up the room a little bit, but it's worth it. Your greens will be bright green, not dingy, dull gray green. They'll be bright green. There'll be a mix of sweet and bitter. The sweet is destroyed by that sulfur. Let the sulfur gas off. That's it. That's the way you cook any southern green. You can do it with kale if you want to. Put it on a plate. Take some hot pepper vinegar. That's nothing more than apple cider vinegar that hot peppers have been pickled in. Over the top and eat it. Now, if you go to Georgia, you go to Louisiana, you go to Alabama, sometimes they cook their collard greens in chicken broth. That's fine. I don't see it as necessary. They add sugar. I think that's an abomination. If you cook your greens with the lid off, you will never need to add sugar. The sugar is there to counter the bitterness from people who cook their greens with the lid on. Don't do that. If you take one thing from this program, never cook your greens with the lid on. Okay? Then they'll add, especially in Louisiana, a lot of spices like Creole seasoning, garlic, and all that good stuff, onion powder, and some cayenne pepper. That's fine. I don't care if you want to season your greens. I don't care if you want to cook them with broth. Don't add sugar, and leave the lid off. That's all I'm asking. Now, okay, if you really want to add sugar and that's your thing, go for it. But don't add sugar to my greens. I guarantee that. You can absolutely cook some ham hocks in there. That's very traditional. You can cook some smoked turkey legs in there. That is very traditional. But greens are one of my favorite foods. I would have to put southern greens in my top 5 foods, and I want them prepared right. And right means leave the lid off. Okay? You don't have to cook them to mush. And the other tip I'm going to give you is if you're looking for a variety of collards that is more naturally sweet and tender than what you are normally served, go with a variety called Morris Heading collard. Morris Heading. That's Morris. Heading means it forms a tighter head like cabbage, as opposed to the larger, looser leaved collards, which are more common, known as the Georgia collard. These collards were developed in Maxton, North Carolina, by a relative of mine. They are an heirloom variety, and if you think you don't like collards, this will totally change your mind. These are collards that do not taste like kale. These are collards that are sweet and savory and have a depth and a richness of flavor. They're heirloom. They're not genetically modified. Do try to get some Morris Heading collards if at all possible, and definitely grow them in your garden, because collards in the South come in just about year-round. I mean, they are like a perennial food, except for the summer, when they bolt, they go seed. But, I mean, we can have collards with a little protection in the dead of winter. So collards are a real southern staple, and the Morris Heading collard is superb. It is far better than any collard you're going to buy. Now, speaking of family, I cannot necessarily claim kin to Sarah Rutledge, although we are likely related. She was the daughter of a signer of the Declaration of Independence from Charleston, South Carolina. My family was in and around Charleston, South Carolina for centuries. One of my ancestors was General Francis Marion, the so-called the Swamp Fox, as he was called, one of the greatest Revolutionary War heroes of South Carolina. A few years ago, I ran into a family in a grocery store in southeastern North Carolina and noticed that they had the same last name as my great-grandfather. And I asked them about it, and they said, yeah, and we started connecting, and we were definitely related. And his cousin was the chief of the Chicora Indian tribe, which lived in Charleston and Georgetown, South Carolina, before even the Spanish got there. So, and it's one of the ancestor tribes to the Lumbees. Now, I don't necessarily claim kin to the Lumbees because I haven't had any genetic testing, and I'm as white as a sheetrock wall. But At least through marriage, I'm related to several Lumbee people in several generations, going back for hundreds of years, and apparently probably has some ancestry in the Chicora tribe as well. So, and then I'm also part French, about a third French, really more like half French, and part of that is Huguenot. And the Huguenots were purposely brought over by the English to settle the Charleston, South Carolina region. General Francis Marion was a Huguenot, by the way. But they settled there. They were brought over actually to try to raise silkworms. The English thought maybe they could have a silk business in Charleston. The silk didn't work so much, but the Huguenots stayed. And so, considering that my family was in the Charleston, say from Charleston, South Carolina to Wilmington, North Carolina, since the late 1600s, more than likely I am related somewhere along the line to Sarah Rutledge, just as I am to Mary Randolph, who wrote the first cookbook in America, who was, I think she was Thomas Jefferson's sister-in-law or something, up in Virginia, because my family was up in Virginia for just as long, and I know we were related by marriage, probably not by bloodlines. But to make a long story short, Sarah Rutledge wrote one of the first cookbooks in the United States. It was published in, I believe, 1835. I believe that's the date that comes to mind. It's known as the Carolina Housewife. Very important cookbook. If you can pick up a copy, I would. Because, this is where rice culture started in the United States. I've told you the story before about how a Spanish ship was wrecked off the coast of Charleston and Georgetown. At that point, English colonists went out to save the Spanish crew because that's the law of the sea, even though that was essentially committing treason against England because England and Spain were at war at the time, or warring over islands in the Caribbean. And in reward for that, the Spanish captain gave them a box of rice seeds. That became Carolina Gold rice. He essentially committed treason against Spain. So this is a great moment in American history. And that began the growing of rice in the American colonies, essentially again from as far north as, say, Wilmington down to about Savannah, Georgia, became rice plantations. Well, Miss Rutledge's book, The Carolina Housewife, is all about the rice culture, the recipes that were being cooked in the Charleston region around, before the Civil War. And you'll be probably very surprised how similar it is to New Orleans cooking. The Creole, there's huge Creole influence. Big French influence from the Huguenots and the Creoles that settled there. Very much like Cajun cooking. And, when people look at my family's cooking, they're like, this is really more like New Orleans than it is North Carolina. I'm like, well, yeah, it really is. I have Creole ancestors. I have, I have some Cajun ancestors. It's that same mix, and it's that same rice culture, and a lot of seafood. And like I've said before, my great grandmother grew her own heirloom hot peppers that had been in the family for years, long before most people in America ever started eating hot peppers. I mean, hot sauce really did not even become popular in America until, sauces certainly didn't until the 80s. But, you can look at H.L. McKenna creating Tabasco sauce after the Civil War. It was still a regional thing. Spicy food was not popular in America well into the 1970s. So, my family's a little different. Well, anyway, I'm going to give you the original recipe for Hoppin John. Now, somebody might say, well, that's not the original recipe for Hoppin John. It started on the coastal Georgia islands. Nope. As far as we know, documented history, the first recipe appears in The Carolina Housewife, written by Sarah Rutledge, very likely an ancestor or a distant cousin of mine. It was named for a certain man who, the story goes, he was a freedman, a former slave, who was a street vendor in Charleston. He had one leg, and he was called Hoppin John because he walked with a crutch, and he would kind of hop on his one leg. Hoppin John sold this rice and black-eyed pea mixture, which is actually very African in its origin. Both the cowpea, the black-eyed peas, and that came from Africa. Africans also grew rice before most of Europe, and they called it ya. So if you've ever heard of like jambalaya, that is literally the French word for ham, jambon, with ya, the African word for rice. So it's jambon à la ya, which becomes jambalaya, right? So this is very, this is a true mix of African and, Creole French culture, um, cooking from mostly a bunch of English people and Huguenots, but mostly English in Charleston. So left out a lot of the spices that you might see in, Cajun cooking or Creole cooking, I should say. This is the original recipe, and I'm going to give it to you as written in the early 1800s by Sarah Rutledge. You can find it in the Carolina Housewife. Hoppin John, 1 pound of bacon, 1 pint of red peas. Wow. Now, see, that's not how we make it these days, is it? We make it with black-eyed peas. This is a very interesting point. You see, red peas were more popular in Creole cooking. Like you think red beans and rice in New Orleans. Very similar dish. But this is the original recipe. Now, when I make it today, I'm using black-eyed peas. If I make red beans and rice, I'm going to make it spicier, and I'm going to use those wonderful red beans. But they call them red peas. Those are small red beans. They're not big kidney beans. But just being New Year's Eve, I'm going to say use black-eyed peas as your substitute because they look like pennies, and that's where we get the tradition. So bacon, 1 pint of, we'll say black-eyed peas, and 1 pint of rice. So equal parts cowpeas to rice. First put on the peas, and when half boiled, add the bacon. When the peas are well boiled, throw in the rice, which must be first washed and gravelled. Yes, you used to have to clean your rice. When the rice has been boiling half an hour, take the pot off the fire and put it on the coals to steam. They were still cooking in a fireplace, okay? As you would in boiling rice alone. What that means is once it's cooked for, I'd have to look at the back of a bag of rice to get my exact time, but say 10-15 minutes. Take at a boil, take it off the burner, you put the lid on, and you let it sit there for another 10-15 minutes as the rice steams. This is the way she's saying do it. Cook it basically half through, take it off the fire and put the lid on it in a warm place, she says on the coals, and let it steam through. Put a quart of water on the peas at first, and if it boils way too much, add a little more hot water. Season with salt and pepper, and if liked, a sprig of green mint. Yes, they were using mint as a savory cooking herb, just like I do. You can see where a lot of my family tradition comes from. In serving, put the rice and peas first in the dish and add the bacon on top. How simple is that? And if you've read my cookbook, you know that's also kind of how I write my recipes. I write them in narrative form as opposed to ingredients and measurements. So it's simply a cooked-together mix of rice, black-eyed peas, and either bacon or ham hock. Most people use ham hock these days, and served with salt and pepper. Now, and she liked a sprig of mint. I think that's a fantastic ingredient. Here's how I do it. I'm going to essentially do the same thing. I like to add a can of crushed tomatoes. That suits my taste. I like to add some hot peppers. That suits my taste. I like to add some Creole seasoning. That suits my taste. Even if I just have plain rice, black-eyed peas, I'm going to have some onion in there. I got to have my onion. And I'm going to top it with some hot sauce. That's it. So mine's a little more on the Creole side. You know, Hoppin John was cooking for English people. He would have left out the tomato. He would have left out garlic and onion. He would have left out hot peppers. But you can see that this recipe is very much like Louisiana red beans and rice. It is a Creole or African French influenced dish, and it is super traditional. In North Carolina, most people are going to have their Hoppin Johns with just black-eyed peas and rice with some Texas Pete on top. Again, I'm going to have some onion and garlic and peppers in there and probably some tomato. You do it the way you like it. Either way. That represents the pennies and those black-eyed peas, and your collard greens represent the dollars, and you're going to have your cash and your coins on your plate, right? And then, of course, I'm going to fry some pork chops. And I mean just some good old bone-in loin chops, fried up in the pan, top them with some Worcestershire sauce, salt and pepper, and I'm good to go. So anyway, that's going to be my New Year's meal, and that's been the way it's been done in my family for hundreds of years. hundreds of years. And God willing, it'll be done in my family for hundreds of years more if I ever meet the right lady and get to have a family of my own, which, hey, there's my New Year's resolution for 2024. I would love to actually meet the right lady and get started in this thing before it's too late. And if it dies with me, it dies with me, but I will die a happy man having eaten plenty of good Southern food. So let's get into the herbs of the day. We will start with one just very brief. I don't have a lot of information on this one at all. This is from my book, Weeds and Grasses of the American Southeast, the Medicinal Weeds and Grasses of the American Southeast. And I just have a brief entry on this, and then we'll get into a more interesting one. Elodia densa, Brazilian waterweed. Only information I got on this is it's an emetic. It can be used to induce vomiting. And it's described to be a very strong emetic, so it could be used as an epikeg. So anyway, now the next one is actually, I got a little more information on it. It's Amelia, or consumption weed. Now this is a very good medicinal plant, also considered a weed. It's called Cupid's paintbrush, Cupid's shaving brush, Flora's paintbrush, because I have a lot of different names. Actually called purple sow thistle, even though that's confusing because there's a completely different plant that's actually called that. Red tassel flower. It seems to have come from Japan, and it's really interesting in the southeast, Georgia and the Carolinas especially. Many of our weeds, so-called, seem to have come from Japan. And they seem to have gotten here before we got involved in World War II and all that. I have no idea how so many of our so-called weeds came here from Japan. But they tend to be some of our most useful plants if used properly. Kudzu, for instance. Kudzu was, Channing Cope wanted it to be used for erosion control and as a wonderful source of hay, a feed for cattle. Well, our government took it and started planting it on roadsides for erosion, and it became the vine that ate the South. It was not intended by Channing Cope to be used in that way. How did Channing Cope know about kudzu? I have no idea. He was a brilliant, brilliant father of permaculture whose reputation was entirely destroyed by what not he did with kudzu. If you want to read how he used kudzu, get his classic book, The Front Porch Farmer. But what the government did with kudzu, for which he got blamed, and he died a hated, ostracized alcoholic through no fault of his own. I would love to do something to restore the reputation of Channing Cope, one of the great agrarian figures of America, a great Southern storyteller. He wrote the gardening column for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for a couple of decades. He was a beloved figure until the government took his idea of kudzu and ruined huge swaths of the country. Not him. He was actually a very good Southern character, a storyteller, a big man who liked his food and his cigars and telling jokes and stories, and you can kind of understand why I might have a little affinity for Channing Cope. But this is Amelia. This weed, as I said, seems to have come from Japan, and I put weed in quotes because it's actually quite useful. According to Plants for a Future, who called it Cupid's shaving brush, a tea made from the leaves is used in the treatment of dysentery. The juice of the leaves is used in treating eye inflammation, night blindness, cuts, wounds, and sore ears. The plant is astringent, depurative, diuretic, expectorant, febrifuge, and sudorific. It is used in the treatment of infantile I can't pronounce that. I never have been able to. Tympanitis, tympanitis, I guess is the way it's pronounced, and bowel complaints. The juice of the root is used in the treatment of diarrhea. The flower heads are chewed and kept in the mouth for 10 minutes to protect the teeth from decay. Now look at all the medicinal uses of this so-called weed. Somebody brought it back here from Japan because they saw the value in this plant. And our extension services and USDA and all that decided to call it a weed. We should be using these weeds. There's a great book out there called Eat the Weeds that basically says, like with kudzu, a very edible plant. Actually, the leaves are protein rich and they taste like spinach. The flowers make actually excellent jams and jellies and wines. The root is incredibly medicinal. We'll get into that when we get, I'm still in the E's, that'll be in the K's. Some of these weeds you don't want to eat because they can be actually powerful medicinal herbs and can be a little toxic. Here's one that obviously has many uses and should certainly be used rather than trying to spray it with Roundup and get rid of it. Now, among our most valuable herbs are what are called the willow herbs. Now, these are the epilobiums. They are not anything to do with the salix or willow trees, but these have been used throughout Europe and Asia for hundreds, thousands of years. And I mean, we'll start with Dioscorides on this one. And again, our government says spray them with Roundup and get rid of them. It's crazy. I mean, it's stupid is what it is. We need to not be stupid. We need to, use the bounty that God blessed us with. The epilobiums are willow herbs. In my area, include Epilobia silatum, which is American willow herb, or fringe willow herb, hairy willow herb, etc., and Epilobium hirsutum, which I think came from Europe. That's codlins and cream, European fireweed, fiddlegrass, hairy willow herb. Hirsutum actually means hairy, by the way. So hairy willow herb is probably most common name for that. So unlike our last few entries, willow herbs have been used for centuries in herbal medicine. They're really good for prostate inflammation, especially. Now, Maria Trebin recommended for what they call BPH now, which were, up until recent years was just prostatitis or inflamed prostate. And I get a little confused over that. Whenever I see BPH, I'm thinking it has something to do with blood pressure. For some reason, I cannot make that change in my mind that now prostate inflammation is called benign prostate, hypoplasia or something? I don't know, BPH, as opposed to prostatitis, which also means inflamed prostate. It's the same thing with like taxonomists that are constantly changing the names of plants. Why don't we just go with stick with what makes sense? I mean, we don't need to give everything initials either. That's all that jargon that doctors like to do. Take them to the ER, stat. Take them to the emergency room. Boy, it takes a lot longer to say emergency room than ER, right? So we really have to shorten it up. Yeah. Anyway. Then we end up with things like snafus, which being a family-oriented show, I will not define for you, but you probably know what it is. Whiskey, Tango, Trot, Foxtrot. Dioscorides wrote of the epilobiums, at least one of which is believed to be hirsutum. That's why I say that one probably is the European, because the one that Dioscorides was writing about in ancient Greece was most likely hirsutum. But he called it Lysimachia, and he describes it, of course. And he said it was, the juice of the leaves was astringent and a liquid medicine used as an enema or suppository. Also good for the throwing up of blood and dysentery. As a pessary or a vaginal suppository, it stops women's excessive menstrual discharges. The herb is effectively stuffed into the nostrils for flows of blood. It would help stop a bleeding nose. It's a very common use of the plant. It is also a wound herb and staunches blood. Many of these very astringent herbs will shrink the capillaries, and so this seems to be a common use for the willow herbs. The smoke, if inhaled, has very sharp fumes so that it drives away snakes and kills flies. Gerard listed several plants that he termed as willow herbs, as did Culpeper. So there are a lot of these plants with similar properties that were often called willow herb. So it makes it kind of hard to get specific, but you also have to realize they have common uses. So Miss Grieve kind of sums up the confusion, or clarifies the confusion, and sums up the willow herbs in the English tradition. She just says the willow herbs, Epilobium, 9 species of which are natives to Great Britain, belong to an order of Onograceae. It's the same families, even primrose and such as that. Fuchsia, even Clarkia. Some are pretty ornamental flowers. And are found in gardens and in the wild. Some come from North America. She already, had classified them as epilobiums. The name of the genus Epilobium comes from 2 Greek words, epi and lobos, meaning upon a pod, from the fact that the flowers stand upon the top of a long, thin, pod-like seed vessel, having somewhat the appearance of a rather thick flower stem. The name willow herb refers to the willow-like form of the leaves. So, of the willow herbs, her favorite was rosebay, which is Epilobium augustifolium, also known as an Onograceae or a evening primrose. She said the rosebay willow herb is one of our handsomest wildflowers, and like the foxglove, it is for its beauty often cultivated as a garden plant. And she said Gerard called it a good and stately plant having leaves like the greatest willow or osier, garnished with brave flowers of great beauty, consisting of 4 leaves, a piece of an orient purple color. So he was very flowery with it as well. Gerard actually wrote a lot about it. He got his from Yorkshire, and he cultivated as a decorative flower. But and it has many common names. In America, we often call it a fireweed. And yes, there are a couple of varieties of fireweed, one of which is one of the epilobiums we're talking about. She goes into great detail about how to grow it and everything. I'm just going to get to uses. The leaves of the rosebay willow herb, this epilobium, have been used as a substitute adulterate for tea. And yes, our fireweed that we find commonly in the woods, the Epilobium fireweed, it makes a very nice tea. It's fermented, and it's very similar to black tea without the caffeine. And in Russia, it was sold under the name of Kapori tea. The young shoots are said to be edible. Also true of our epilobiums. My new book that I just finished, by the way, coming out, I will announce it officially next week, is a book about foraging spring wild edibles, and I have a whole chapter on fireweed. So, I'm having to restrain myself from going into great detail about the edible uses of this plant. And apparently, in England, they even made an ale from the plant, and it was considering, this is interesting, the ale made from the plant is rendered still more intoxicating with the addition of a toadstool, i.e. the fly Agaricus muscarius. That is one of the psychedelic mushrooms in America. There are 2 that, the hippies and such really seek after. And one of them is the fly agaric. It is the red one with all the little white spots on it that, the Allman Brothers were fond of putting on their album covers. They were fond of the mushroom as well. The English apparently made a traditional ale out of fireweed with the fly agaric mushroom, which I would say that could be quite a bit very dangerous. But that would be a strong ale. That would be an ale that would not only make you drunk, but then you'd start seeing fairies and such. So I'm not going to recommend, seriously, when you get into the history of herbal medicine, it really just tears to shreds the whole Puritan English history we were taught in high school. I mean, they were drinking some pretty potent brews. And there's no wonder we have so many ghost stories and stories like Beowulf and such that came out of that culture. They were flying. a lot of times. I mean, and not always intentionally. The the weed. Oh, what's the name of it? Darnel that grows among wheat um, is it makes its own natural LSD, lysergic acid, and so a lot of times the bread that they were eating um, was acid. I mean, it was LSD. I mean, within the bread, but they maybe just they thought it was wholesome wheat bread, but there was darnel in it, and they were flying. I'm telling you, that's why they had all these legends of witches and such. You know. Anyway, she says medicinal actions and uses. The roots and leaves have demulcent, tonic, and astringent properties, and are used in domestic medicine in decoctions, infusions, and cataplasms as astringents. Cataplasm is just like sort of like a poultice paste. You put it on top of a wound to seal it up. Used much in America as an astringent, and it was in early America. The plant contains a mucilage and a tannin, which means it both soothes and astringes the tissue, making it very good for, I said it was consumption weed, very good for the lungs and for diarrhea and dysentery. Maria Trevin wrote extensively on this. She said, I received a letter from a family man in which it stated, I quote, I beg you to show me a way back to health and give me my family back their healthy father. Before he had related his story, in 1961, a chronic inflammation of the prostate gland became acute through bathing in water containing radium. Well, thank God we don't have that problem much anymore. He went from one hospital to another. No doctor operated on him, and he was in despair. Every time he had a bowel movement, there was pus and blood in the stools. Due to many medications, he developed duodenal or duodenal, as they want to say these days, ulcers, serious liver disorder, and valuable intestinal bacteria were destroyed. He became very sick, and on doctor's orders had to stop all medication. Then he was, as he wrote, operated on electrically. Despite the operation, the inflammation did not clear up, so they probably went in and kind of cut away some of the prostate gland and then cauterized it. So, I mean, really serious. I can't imagine how painful this would be. Medications and infections worsened his condition again. Then he started to drink stinging nettle tea and a special tea for bladder trouble, which improved his condition so that he was able to go back to work. He could have spared himself all this suffering had he but known of the small-flowered willow herb, which can cure disorders of the prostate gland. The willow herb, until now hardly found mention in herbals, has since the first publication of this book in the German language started an almost triumphal march across Europe and even further as a medicinal herb for disorders of the prostate gland. There are several varieties of willow herb, and some people are uncertain which are the ones with medicinal properties. I will mention the ones that can be used. Pink willow herb is Epilobium roseum. Small-flowered willow herb, Epilobium parvifolium. Mountain willow herb, Epilobium montanum. Dark green willow herb, Epilobium obscurum. Lance-leaved willow herb, Epilobium lanceolatum. Hill willow herb, Epilobium collinum. Marsh willow herb, Epilobium palustra. Gravel willow herb, Epilobium flascherae. Alpine willow herb, Epilobium anaga. I can't even pronounce that. The willow herbs with the medicinal properties are recognized by their small flowers. The color is reddish, pale pink, almost white. So, this is essentially the one we have in the woods, so we call fireweed. The flowers stand atop a long, thin pod-like seed vessel. They split and disclose many silky hairs which are embedded in the tiny seeds, which embedded are the tiny seeds. That was hard to read. The varieties mentioned, the whole herb is gathered, that is, the stems with the leaves and flowers, but care should be taken to pick the herb in the middle of the stem as it breaks easily so that it can form new side shoots. The plant is gathered fresh In the most severe cases, only 2 cups of willow tea herb are drunk, 1 cup in the morning on an empty stomach and 1 in the evening. But it does not mean that a visit to the doctor is not necessary. In any case, for severe illnesses, a doctor has to be consulted. Now, she cautions that the hairy willow herb, as we said, Epilobium hirsutum, should not be used, that the smaller species and was more beneficial. But she also didn't like the rose bay willow herb, which is the one that Maria Trebin likes so much. She said that she didn't use either the hirsutum or the rose bay willow herb at all. I'm not exactly sure what her bias was against them. But she said, I was a young woman when my father-in-law in his prime died from hypertrophy of the prostate gland. That means an enlarged prostate. A neighbor who knew a lot about herbs showed me the small flower willow herb and said, had your father-in-law drunk the tea made from this plant, he would still be alive today. Take note of this plant. You are still a young woman and you may be able to help a lot of people. That's how she began to learn about it. She said, through my mother, I heard of a patient who had undergone 3 operations for clinically diagnosed cancer of the bladder and was in a sad state. I recommended the willow herb tea, and later I heard from his doctor that he had recovered. And she goes on and talks about many, many people she consulted with that she recommended. Now, she specifically used the small willow herb. That was the Epilobium parvifolium. Now, as we've seen, Miss Grieve preferred the roseum, the rose bay willow, and Dioscorides the hirsutum. She didn't use either of them or like either of them. So many different cultures use the various varieties of the epilobiums somewhat interchangeably, and in America we just consider them to be weeds. She said, here's a letter. She said, my sister-in-law suffered from a tear in the intestine and bladder caused by an x-ray treatment. It was so painful that the doctor had to give her morphine. According per the illustration in your book, Health Through God's Pharmacy, we looked for the small flowered willow herb and gave it as a tea to my sister-in-law. After having drunk the tea for 1 week, the pain subsided. She said many who suffer from a disorder of the prostate gland are able to find relief without an operation through willow herb. If an operation has been performed, the willow herb tea relieves the burning and other complaints that often occur afterwards, but a doctor should be consulted, obviously. She said a man who had recovered from a prostate disorder wrote, the small flowered willow herb has relieved my prostate disorder. I was in a hospital with a heart infarction, a heart attack, and also suffered from prostate disorder, and because of my heart trouble, I could not be operated on. I heard of the wonderful willow herb, which has helped so many similar cases. I started to drink 3 cups daily, and after several days, I had no more complaints. I still drink 2 cups per day for a complete recovery. I thank God from the bottom of my heart. May you, Miss Trebin, help many more people with a small flowered willow herb. So wonderful, and I always recommend, when people say, what's the first herbal book I should get? I say, well, I'd love to tell you to buy mine, but Maria Trebin's books, I think, are actually the best starting place. Then buy mine, buy hers used off Amazon, off eBay or Amazon for like $3 a piece, and then buy mine, I owe a lot to Maria Trebin. She was a huge inspiration in my getting back into herbal medicine. After I had been working in journalism for a while and came back to the mountains and started reconnecting with my roots. Had it not been for Maria Trebin, I don't know that I would have written all my books. I mean, she was a great inspiration, especially for investigating German folk medicine, Father Nape, Father Kunzel, Brother Aloysius, that, really made things click for me. Gave me a way to view herbal medicine using my native plants and native training, synthesizing it with the British and Greek tradition in a very Christian, very Catholic way, actually. So I owe a lot to Miss Trebin. In Russia, these herbs have a lot of use. As mentioned before, popular tea And Igor Vilovich Zevin wrote, "This tall, beautiful perennial known as Ivan's tea, centuries ago, was once Russia's most popular non-alcoholic beverage, often enjoyed as a refreshing hot drink after meals. Nearly every peasant family grew Ivan's tea in their garden. As a caffeine-free beverage, willow herb is relaxing and calmative. Although modern Russians prefer black tea for everyday use, they do value Ivan's tea for its medicinal properties. As a calmative, an infusion made from the leaves of this herb is used to relieve headaches and promote sleep. A decoction made from the willow herb is used as a styptic and antiphlogistic for stomach and intestinal problems such as ulcers, colitis, and gastritis. It is also used to relieve symptoms of scrofula. That's an inflamed glandular condition. You can see how an astringent would help with that. In folk medicine, a powder made from the willow herb is used to heal wounds. And a poultice of willow herb is an effective remedy to treat inflammations of the eyes, ears, throat, and nose. Willow herb can also be used to relieve asthmatic episodes and to treat whooping cough and hiccups. In America now, looking at the ones that grow here, resources of the southern fields and forests liked Epilobium augustifolium the best, and found in the mountains of North Carolina where I live. And yes, it does grow in my backyard. They said the leaves and roots are said to be demulcent, that means softening, moistening, etc., tonic and astringent, and yield their virtues to alcohol, meaning you can make a tincture of it. They are used by the eclectics, adds Dr. Wood, generally and locally in decoctions, infusions, or cataplasms in cases which call for astringent remedies. In other words, good for wounds. King's Medical Dispensatory, 1898, said, Epilobium has never gained a place in the front rank as a medicine. This is often the case with drugs that have not decidedly poisonous properties, so non-toxic plants, or with drugs that have not yet yielded to the chemist an active principle. That it has not attained prominence as a remedy is not the fault of the plant, for in certain cases of summer bowel troubles, it is without equal. The infusion is probably the best form administered through alcoholic preparations. The infusion is probably the best form administered. That means a tea. Though alcoholic preparations are not without remedial activity, which means tinctures also work. Specific Epilobium is a reliable preparation. This infusion is not unpleasant, its taste being somewhat like that of tea. Epilobium is tonic, astringent, emulsant, and emollient. The uses given for it are many, but we would particularly allude to its value in summer bowel complaints. You'll read this a lot in old books, and I'm thinking summer bowel complaints were diarrhea from spoiled food because of hot weather or bad water. Again, because of hot weather. That's the best I can figure. In fact, in Cherokee medicine, they often have remedies for the summer diarrhea. That's all I can figure, is that it's, tainted food due to spoilage, which isn't going to happen a lot in the winter, So it has deserved reputation in chronic diarrhea and has been known to give better service than other remedies in diarrhea following camp or army diarrhea. That's dysentery, so it was especially useful for really severe stuff, where the fecal matter was contaminating the drinking water. The infusion should be freely used. Several cases of diarrhea of a watery character due to the change of drinking water have been promptly checked by the infusion of this tincture. Certain forms of cholera and phantom, especially with greenish discharge, have been controlled by this agent in domestic practice when ordinary remedies failed, especially those prescribed by physicians. So it was considered to be really, really good. Professor Scudder found that an infusion of Epilobium was a favorite remedy to correct and restrain diarrhea of typhoid or enteric fever. This particular condition, others test its effectiveness, so it was used a lot. It is, let's see, we don't need to get into all these symptoms, but yeah, one definitely you want to have on hand for really bad diarrhea, the stuff that can kill you, can get out of control and kill you. Apparently, it was much used in Mexico for typhoid around 1900. These specific indications: diarrhea with colicky pain, feculent discharges, diarrhea with contracted abdomen, chronic diarrhea, typhoid fever, typhoid dysentery. So yeah. Now getting into modern use, Plants for Future says the leaves have been used as, and this is for hirsutum. They specifically say of Epilobium hirsutum, which is one that Miss Trebin didn't like. Medicinal use of codlins and cream, as they call it in England. The leaves have been used as an astringent, but there are some reports of violent poisoning with epileptic-like convulsions as a result of its use. So maybe that's why Miss Trebin didn't like hirsutum, the very one that Dioscorides liked. Maybe in large amounts it can be toxic. I don't know. So let's just put that out there, and we'll take that into consideration. Peterson Field Guide says of Epilobium angustifolium, however, American Indians peeled the root for burns, skin sores, swelling, boils, carbuncles, leaf and root tea, a folk remedy for dysentery, abdominal cramps, summer bowel troubles. Leaf poultice used for mouth ulcers, leaf extract shown to reduce inflammation. And of angustifolium, Plants for Future says, and this is the one that I gather is a wild, edible, the young leaves and shoots are edible as a pot herb and mildly mucilaginous, but also bitter and astringent. A strong tea is a mild laxative and also settles the stomach. Fireweed is useful internally for sore throats and ulcers, externally for burns and skin irritations. The powdered core of the plant will sometimes help protect the hands and face from the cold. It prevents stinging sensations when rewarming the skin. So anyway, there are many epilobiums, and most of them are effective medicinally. I suppose you would wish to be careful with hirsutum. If Miss Greaves and Plants for a Future are right. However, again, hirsutum was the one used by Dioscorides, and one of the ones mentioned medicinally by Miss Greaves. By several other authors. The Epilobium silatum seems to be synonymous with angustifolium, and I think I've probably been using them interchangeably, not even knowing that they were two different plants. Most all the epilobiums in America are considered weeds. Most all seem to be useful, and definitely one you're going to want to have in your medicine cabinet for wounds at the very least, and probably diarrhea. And definitely useful plants, not the hated weeds that we've been taught that they are. So y'all, I'm going to wrap up this rather long episode right now and get back to my New Year's cooking so I can have my black-eyed peas and collard greens, which should give us a prosperous new year, as my ancestors once thought. So remember, Carolina Housewife by Sarah Rutledge is the source for that Hoppin John recipe. And have a wonderful new year. I tell you, I'm excited for 2024. I feel like it's going to be a year of great change and great needed change. So here's wishing you all a happy new year. And I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.